The key turned in the lock with a soft click that seemed to echo through the empty hallway like a gunshot. Sarah stood frozen at her own front door, her black funeral dress still wrinkled from the long flight home, her father's funeral program clutched in her trembling hand. The house felt different, somehow charged with an energy that made her skin crawl. She could hear voices upstairs, muffled but distinct. A woman's laugh. A man's voice she knew better than her own heartbeat. Her husband Alexander was supposed to be at work. He told her he couldn't make it to the funeral because of an important client meeting that would secure their future. "I'm so sorry, baby," he'd said, kissing her forehead as she packed her suitcase with tears streaming down her face. "You know I'd be there if I could. Your dad would understand." Now, standing in their marble foyer with her luggage still in her hands, Sarah felt something cold and sharp twist in her stomach. The voices were coming from their bedroom. Their bedroom. The same room where Alexander had held her just 3 nights ago, whispering promises about growing old together, about the family they'd build, about forever. She set her suitcase down carefully, her movements slow and deliberate like she was moving through water. Each step up the carpeted stairs felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff. The voices grew clearer with each step. Alexander's deep laugh, the one that used to make her feel safe and loved, now sounded foreign and cruel. And the woman. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She recognized that voice. Rebecca from Alexander's office. The same Rebecca who'd sent a sympathy card when Sarah's father got sick. The same Rebecca who'd smiled at Sarah with such warmth at the company Christmas party just 4 months ago. "She'll never find out," Alexander was saying as Sarah reached the top of the stairs. "She's too trusting. Too naive. And honestly, after we're married, we'll have access to everything. Her father was loaded, there's got to be an inheritance coming." Sarah's hand flew to her purse, where the sealed envelope her father had pressed into her hands just hours before he died still sat unopened. "Don't tell anyone about this yet," he'd whispered, his voice barely audible over the beeping machines. "Not even Alexander. Wait until you're ready. Trust your instincts, sweetheart." "Are you sure she doesn't suspect anything?" Rebecca's voice was breathless, intimate. "She looked at me strangely at the Christmas party. Sarah doesn't suspect a thing. She's been so focused on her sick father that she hasn't noticed I've been working late every night for the past 6 months. Poor thing thinks I'm being supportive by giving her space to grieve." Sarah pressed her back against the wall outside their bedroom door, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they could hear it. 6 months. This had been going on for 6 months. While she'd been flying back and forth to care for her dying father, while she'd been crying herself to sleep with worry and grief, while she'd been grateful for what she thought was Alexander's understanding and support, he'd been here. With Rebecca. In their bed. "When are you going to ask for the divorce?" Rebecca's voice was casual, like they were discussing what to have for dinner. "Soon. I'm waiting for the inheritance to come through first. No point in splitting assets if there are about to be a lot more assets to split. Sarah's father owned half of downtown Portland. We're talking millions, Rebecca. Millions that will be half mine once we're married. And then we can be together for real. No more sneaking around. No more lies. No more pretending to love someone I can barely stand to touch." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She doubled over, pressing her hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. How long had he felt this way? How long had she been living with a stranger who looked at her with disgust while she looked at him with love? She heard movement from inside the room, the rustle of sheets, footsteps on hardwood. Sarah forced herself to move, slipping quickly into the guest room at the end of the hall just as their bedroom door opened. "I should go," Rebecca was saying. "My husband thinks I'm at a client dinner." "Same time tomorrow?" Alexander's voice was warm in a way it hadn't been with Sarah in months. "Wouldn't miss it. I love you, Alex." "Love you too, baby." Sarah sat on the guest room bed, staring at the wall as she listened to Rebecca's heels click down the stairs and the front door close. She heard Alexander humming in the shower, actually humming while her world fell apart in the room next door. Her phone buzzed with a text message. From Alexander. "Hope you're holding up okay, sweetheart. Client meeting ran late but thinking of you. See you when you get home tomorrow. Love you." The lie was so casual, so practiced, that Sarah almost admired the skill of it. If she hadn't just heard him planning her divorce, she would have believed it completely. She would have texted back with gratitude for his support, maybe even guilt for doubting him during those moments when something felt off. Sarah pulled the envelope from her purse with shaking hands. Her father's handwriting on the front. "For Sarah, open when you're ready to be free." She'd thought it was just his way of talking about grief, about being free from the pain of watching him die. Now she wondered if he'd known something she didn't. Inside the envelope were documents she didn't understand: legal papers, property deeds, bank statements. But the numbers made her dizzy. $15 million. $15 million in properties, investments, and cash that her father had quietly accumulated over decades of hard work and smart investing. And it was all hers. Every penny. There was also a note in her father's familiar scrawl. Sarah, I never trusted Alexander. A man who marries a woman for her potential inheritance isn't worthy of her love. I've made sure these assets are protected in a trust that only you can access. Use this gift to build the life you deserve. Don't let anyone take advantage of your kind heart. I love you forever, Daddy. Sarah read the note 3 times before the words really sank in. Her father had known. Somehow he'd known that Alexander wasn't who he pretended to be. And he'd protected her in the only way he could. Alexander's voice drifted up from downstairs. He was on the phone now, probably with Rebecca, probably planning their next meeting. Sarah looked at the documents spread across the guest room bed and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Power. They thought she was naive. They thought she was trusting. They thought she would never find out, and even if she did, they'd already won because they'd get half of everything in a divorce. But they were wrong about everything. Sarah wasn't just the grieving daughter they pitied or the trusting wife they could manipulate. She was now one of the wealthiest women in Portland, and they had no idea. For the first time since she'd walked into this house, Sarah smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, it was something colder, sharper. Something that would have surprised anyone who knew sweet, accommodating Sarah. Alexander wanted a divorce? He'd get one. But it wouldn't be anything like what he was expecting. Sarah carefully folded the documents and put them back in the envelope. Tomorrow she would start making calls. Tonight, she would lie in this guest room bed and plan exactly how she was going to destroy the life of the man who destroyed hers. She could hear Alexander moving around downstairs, probably cleaning up evidence of Rebecca's visit, probably practicing his concerned husband act for when she came home tomorrow. He had no idea she was already here. No idea that everything had changed. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself feel the anger, really feel it for the first time. It burned through her like fire, melting away months of self-doubt and sadness. Alexander thought he was so smart, so careful, so in control. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Alexander's voice saying he could barely stand to touch her. Every time she started to drift off, she remembered Rebecca's laugh echoing through what used to be her sanctuary. By the time the sun rose, she felt hollowed out and raw, but strangely clear-headed. She heard Alexander moving around downstairs, getting ready for another day of lies. Part of her wanted to march down there and confront him immediately, to scream and throw things and demand answers. But the smarter part of her, the part that sounded like her father's voice, told her to wait, to plan, to be strategic. Sarah waited until she heard Alexander's car pull out of the driveway before she moved. She needed to understand exactly what her father had left her before she could figure out how to use it. She spread the documents across the kitchen table and started reading carefully. The more she read, the more amazed she became. Her father hadn't just been successful, he'd been brilliant. While working his day job as an engineer, he'd been quietly buying up properties in Portland neighborhoods that were about to boom. He'd invested in tech startups that had made him millions. He'd even owned a piece of the company where Alexander worked, though Alexander had never known it. The trust was structured so that only Sarah could access the funds, and only after her father's death. Alexander's name wasn't mentioned anywhere in the documents. Even if they were married, he would have no legal claim to any of it. Sarah's phone rang, making her jump. Alexander's name flashed on the screen. "Hi, honey," she answered, proud of how normal her voice sounded. "Hey, baby. How are you holding up? I know yesterday was rough." Yesterday. The funeral. Sarah had forgotten that as far as Alexander knew, she'd just buried her father. "It was hard, but I'm okay. I should be home this afternoon." "Good. I missed you." "Take your time, though don't rush if you need more time to handle things there." Of course he didn't want her to rush home. He probably had plans with Rebecca. "Actually, I think I will stay another day. There are some legal things I need to take care of." Legal things? For the first time, Alexander sounded genuinely interested in something related to her father's death. "Just paperwork. You know how it is." Sarah kept her voice deliberately vague. Let him wonder. "Anything I can help with? I could fly out tonight if you need me." The offer was so fake it was almost funny. "No, that's okay. You have that big presentation this week. I can handle it." "You sure? If there are financial things to sort out, I want to be there to support you." There it was. The real reason for his sudden concern. Sarah felt a flicker of satisfaction. It's mostly just sentimental stuff. Nothing important. She could practically hear Alexander's disappointment through the phone. Okay. Well, call me if you need anything. I love you. Love you too, Sarah lied smoothly. After she hung up, Sarah sat staring at the documents for a long time. $15 million. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having. More money than Alexander could ever have imagined her having. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Lisa. How are you holding up? Let me know if you need anything. Sarah stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'm okay. Actually, can I ask you something? Hypothetically, if you found out your husband was cheating, what would you do? The response came back immediately. Hypothetically? I'd ruin his life. What? Is everything okay? Sarah smiled grimly. Lisa had always been the fierce one in their friendship. The one who never let anyone take advantage of her. Maybe it was time for Sarah to learn from that. Everything's fine. Just wondering. But everything wasn't fine, and Sarah was tired of pretending it was. She gathered up the documents and headed for her father's study. If she was going to do this, she needed to do it right. Her father's study was exactly as he'd left it, meticulous and organized. Sarah sat in his leather chair and opened his laptop. The password was her birthday, like always. Her father had never been good with technology, but he'd kept detailed records of everything. Sarah spent the next 3 hours going through his files, understanding the full scope of what he'd built. The properties alone were worth $8 million. The investment portfolio was worth another $6 million. And there was $1 million in cash sitting in accounts that Alexander didn't even know existed. But more than the money, Sarah found something else. Records of her father's conversations with a private investigator named Tom Mitchell. Her father hadn't just suspected Alexander, he'd had him investigated. The files made Sarah's stomach turn. Photos of Alexander and Rebecca at hotels. Credit card receipts for jewelry that Sarah had never received. Phone records showing hundreds of calls between Alexander and Rebecca, often while Sarah was at the hospital with her father. Her father had known everything. And he'd documented it all. Sarah found Tom Mitchell's business card tucked into one of the files. Without hesitating, she picked up the phone and dialed. Mitchell Investigations, a gruff voice answered. Mr. Mitchell? This is Sarah Webb. I think my father, Robert Chin, was one of your clients. There was a pause. Sarah, I'm sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man. Thank you. I found his files about my husband. Are those investigations still active? No, they ended when your father passed. But I kept all the documentation just in case. Your father thought you might need it someday. I need it now. I can have everything to you by tonight. Sarah, your father loved you very much. He wanted to make sure you had options when you were ready to use them. Options? Sarah liked the sound of that. For the first time in years, she felt like she had choices instead of just obligations. Mr. Mitchell? I want to hire you for a new investigation. I want to know everything about Rebecca Santos. Everything. Her marriage, her finances, her secrets. All of it. I can do that. What's your timeline? Sarah thought about Alexander's voice last night, talking about divorce, about stealing her inheritance, about barely being able to stand touching her. As fast as possible. Money is no object. After she hung up, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in months. Excitement. Not the kind of excitement she used to feel about her marriage or her future with Alexander, but something sharper and more focused. The excitement of having a plan. She picked up her phone and dialed another number from her father's files. Harrison, Williams and Associates, a professional voice answered. I'd like to speak with Janet Williams, please. This is Sarah Webb. I believe she handled some business for my father, Robert Chin. One moment, please. A few minutes later, a warm female voice came on the line. Sarah, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father spoke about you constantly. He was so proud of you. Thank you. Ms. Williams, I need to ask you something important. How quickly can someone get divorced in Oregon? There was a pause. That depends on several factors. Are you asking for yourself? Yes. And I want to make sure I keep everything that's mine. With the trust your father set up, that shouldn't be a problem. But Sarah, are you sure about this? Divorce is a big step. Sarah thought about Alexander humming in the shower while her heart broke in the next room. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Then let's set up a meeting. Can you be in my office tomorrow morning? I'll be there. Sarah hung up and looked around her father's study one more time. On his desk was a photo of the two of them from her college graduation. She was smiling wide, full of hope for the future. Her father's arm was around her shoulders, and he was looking at her with such pride and love. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered to the photo. "You were protecting me even when I didn't know I needed protecting." Her phone buzzed with another text from Alexander. "Missing you. Can't wait until you're home. This house feels empty without you." Sarah deleted the message without responding. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Let him start to feel just a tiny bit of the uncertainty she'd been living with for months without knowing it. Tomorrow she would start building her case. She would hire the best lawyers, gather all the evidence, and plan her exit strategy. Alexander thought he was so clever, planning to divorce her and take half of what he thought were their shared assets. He had no idea that she was about to take everything from him instead. Sarah packed the documents carefully in her father's safe and headed upstairs to pack her real clothes. She had work to do, and she couldn't do it while playing the part of the grieving widow. It was time to become someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who didn't let other people decide her worth or her future. It was time to become the woman her father had raised her to be. The law offices of Harrison, Williams and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown Portland building. Sarah had driven past it 1,000 times but never imagined she'd be walking through its marble lobby as a client. Everything about the place screamed success and power, exactly what she needed right now. Janet Williams was nothing like Sarah had expected. Instead of the stern, intimidating woman she'd pictured, Janet was warm and approachable, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses and a handshake that conveyed both strength and reassurance. "Sarah, please sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great, thank you." Sarah settled into the plush leather chair across from Janet's mahogany desk. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the city spread out below, including the building where Alexander worked, completely unaware that his wife was planning his downfall just blocks away. "I've reviewed all of your father's documents," Janet said, handing Sarah a steaming mug. "First, let me say that he was incredibly thorough in protecting your interests. The trust he established is ironclad. Your husband would have no claim to any of those assets, even in a divorce." "Even though we're married?" "Even though you're married. Your father specifically structured it that way. He was very concerned about protecting you from exactly the situation you're facing now." Sarah felt a pang of grief mixed with gratitude. Her father had known. Somehow, he'd seen through Alexander's charm and seen the man underneath. How did he know? Janet's expression grew gentle. "Your father hired Tom Mitchell to investigate Alexander before your wedding. The report wasn't favorable. But you were so happy, and your father didn't want to break your heart with suspicions. So instead, he decided to protect you in a way that would give you options later." "He investigated Alexander before we got married?" Sarah felt sick. "And he never said anything?" "Your father loved you. He wanted you to make your own choices, even if he disagreed with them. But he also wanted to make sure you'd be safe if those choices turned out badly." Sarah stared into her coffee, processing this information. Her father had known for 3 years that Alexander wasn't trustworthy, and he'd never said a word. Instead, he'd quietly built a safety net that would catch her when she fell. "So what are my options now?" Sarah asked. Janet leaned forward, her expression becoming more businesslike. "That depends on what you want to achieve. If you just want out of the marriage, we can file for divorce immediately. Oregon is a no-fault state, so we don't need to prove adultery, though we certainly can if you want to. With your father's trust structure, you'd keep all of your inherited assets, and you'd likely get half of any marital assets accumulated during your marriage." "What about the house? Is it in both your names?" "Yes, but we bought it with money Alexander inherited from his grandfather. I never contributed financially to the purchase." Janet made a note. "That complicates things slightly, but it's not insurmountable. What other marital assets are there?" "Not much. Alexander's salary, our joint savings account, maybe $50,000 total. We live pretty modestly." Sarah paused. "Or at least I thought we did. I'm not sure what he's been spending money on that I don't know about. Tom Mitchell's investigation might shed light on that. He's very thorough." Janet set down her pen and looked at Sarah directly. "But before we talk about strategy, I need to know what your real goal is here. Do you want a quick, clean divorce? Or do you want to make Alexander pay for what he's done?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah thought about Alexander's voice last night, so casual as he talked about barely being able to stand touching her. She thought about Rebecca's laugh in their bedroom. She thought about 6 months of lies while she grieved her father's illness. "I want him to pay," Sarah said quietly. "I want him to understand what it feels like to have someone you trust completely betray you. I want him to feel as small and worthless as he made me feel. Janet smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Then we need to be strategic. A simple divorce gives you your freedom, but it doesn't really cost Alexander anything except his access to assets he never knew existed. If you want real consequences, we need to think bigger. What do you mean? Your father's trust doesn't just contain money, Sarah. It contains power. You own significant real estate in this city. You have investment stakes in multiple companies. You could make Alexander's life very uncomfortable if you chose to. Sarah felt a thrill of possibility. Tell me more. Janet pulled out a thick folder. Let's start with the company where Alexander works. Meridian Tech Solutions. Your father owned 12% of that company, enough to have a voice in major decisions, including personnel choices. You mean I could get Alexander fired? Not directly. But you could certainly make his working environment challenging. Especially if we can prove he's been using company resources for personal activities. Janet's smile grew wider. Tom Mitchell's investigation found evidence that Alexander has been using his company credit card for hotel rooms and dinners with Rebecca. That's grounds for termination with cause. Sarah's pulse quickened. What else? The apartment complex where Rebecca lives with her husband? Your father owned that building. You're now Rebecca's landlord. You're kidding. I never kid about real estate. And here's the interesting part: Rebecca's lease is up for renewal next month. As the new owner, you have the right to approve or deny that renewal. Sarah sat back in her chair, stunned. It was like her father had anticipated every possible angle of revenge. Is this all legal? Completely legal. You're not obligated to renew a lease, and companies have the right to terminate employees who misuse company resources. Everything we're discussing is within your rights as a property owner and shareholder. But it feels like... Sarah struggled for the word. Like you're playing God with their lives? Janet's expression softened. Sarah, these people plan to destroy your marriage and steal your inheritance. They were already playing God with your life. The only difference is that now you have the power to play back. Sarah thought about this. Part of her, the part that had been raised to be nice, to be accommodating, to put other people's comfort before her own, felt guilty about the idea of using her power to hurt others. But the larger part of her, the part that was tired of being taken advantage of, felt something else entirely. What about Rebecca's husband? He's innocent in all this. True. But he also deserves to know what his wife has been doing. We can arrange for him to receive evidence of the affair without revealing your involvement. Sarah felt a flicker of sympathy for Rebecca's husband, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger. Rebecca had made her choices. She'd known she was destroying 2 marriages, not just one. How long would all of this take? That depends on how patient you want to be. We could have Alexander fired within a week. Rebecca evicted within a month. But if you want maximum impact, I'd recommend a more coordinated approach. Meaning? Janet's eyes gleamed. Meaning we orchestrate everything to happen at once. Alexander gets fired, Rebecca gets evicted, her husband finds out about the affair, and you serve Alexander with divorce papers all on the same day. Complete devastation all at once, with no time for them to regroup or plan a response. The idea was breathtaking in its thoroughness. Sarah imagined Alexander's face when his carefully constructed world collapsed all at once. The same Alexander who'd been so confident last night, so sure that naive little Sarah would never figure out what was happening. How much would this cost? Sarah, with your father's assets, cost isn't really a factor. But even if it were, most of what we're doing involves exercising rights you already have. The main expense would be Tom Mitchell's continued investigation and my fees. Sarah made her decision. Do it. All of it. I want them to understand what it feels like to have their world pulled out from under them. Janet nodded approvingly. Excellent. Now let's talk timeline. I'll need about 2 weeks to coordinate everything properly. During that time, you'll need to act completely normal with Alexander. Can you do that? Sarah thought about going home tonight, looking Alexander in the eye, and pretending she still loved him. It would be the hardest thing she'd ever done. But it would also be worth it. I can do it. Good. And Sarah? Your father would be proud of you. He always said you were stronger than you knew. As Sarah left the law office, she felt like a different person than the one who'd walked in 2 hours ago. For the first time in months, she felt like she had control over her life. More than that, she felt powerful. Alexander and Rebecca thought they were so clever, so careful, so in control of the situation. They had no idea that Sarah was about to turn their world upside down. In 2 weeks, they would learn exactly how wrong they'd been about everything. Sarah sat in her car outside her house for 10 minutes, staring at the familiar red door she'd walked through as a happy wife just 2 days ago. Now everything looked different: the garden she'd planted with such hope, the porch where she and Alexander used to sit and plan their future, the windows of the bedroom where he'd betrayed her with another woman. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked tired, which was perfect. A grieving daughter should look tired. She'd practiced her expressions during the drive home: the sad smile, the grateful look when Alexander offered comfort, the trusting gaze when he told her about his day. Every emotion calculated, every response designed to keep him convinced that she was still the naive wife he could manipulate. The front door opened before she could reach for her keys. Alexander stood there in the doorway, looking concerned and loving, an Oscar-worthy performance that made Sarah's stomach turn. "Baby, you look exhausted," he said, pulling her into a hug that she forced herself not to stiffen in. "How was the flight?" "Long," Sarah said, letting her voice sound small and tired. "I'm just glad to be home. I missed you so much." Alexander's arms tightened around her, and Sarah wondered if he'd held Rebecca this same way just hours ago. "I know this has been the hardest week of your life." If only he knew, Sarah thought, but she just nodded against his chest. "Thank you for being so understanding about everything. I know I haven't been very good company lately." "Hey, don't apologize for grieving. Your father meant everything to you." Alexander pulled back to look at her, his expression so convincing that Sarah almost believed he actually cared. "Did you get all the legal stuff sorted out?" There was the real reason for his concern. Sarah had been waiting for this question since she'd walked in the door. "Most of it," she said vaguely. "There's still some paperwork to finish, but nothing too complicated. Dad didn't have as much as I thought he did. Just the house and some small investments." Sarah watched Alexander's face carefully. For just a moment, she saw disappointment flash across his features before he covered it with sympathetic concern. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm sorry. I know you were hoping." He trailed off as if he didn't want to seem mercenary. "Hoping what?" Sarah asked innocently. "Nothing. I just thought maybe your dad had been able to save more over the years. But it doesn't matter. We have everything we need." Alexander kissed her forehead. "I made your favorite dinner. Chicken parmesan." The gesture was so thoughtful, so perfectly caring, that for a moment Sarah felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation for what she'd heard. Maybe Alexander really did love her and she was about to destroy an innocent man. Then she remembered Rebecca's voice. "When are you going to ask for the divorce?" And Alexander's response, "Soon. I'm waiting for the inheritance to come through first." The doubt vanished as quickly as it had come. "That sounds perfect," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "I'm starving. I barely ate anything on the plane." During dinner, Alexander was the perfect husband. He asked about the funeral, listened sympathetically as Sarah made up details about saying goodbye to her father, and shared amusing stories about his week to distract her from her grief. He was attentive, funny, and caring, everything that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. It was a masterful performance, and Sarah found herself genuinely impressed by his acting skills. He should have been on stage instead of in tech sales. "How was work this week?" Sarah asked as they cleared the dishes. "Busy. You know how it is always something urgent that needs attention." Alexander's tone was casual, but Sarah caught the slight tension in his shoulders. "Actually, I might have to work late again tomorrow. We're trying to close this big deal with a new client." "Anyone I know?" "Probably not. It's some investment firm downtown. Pretty boring stuff." Sarah nodded sympathetically while making a mental note to ask Tom Mitchell to check what Alexander was really doing tomorrow night. "Well, don't work too hard. You've been putting in so many long hours lately. Just trying to build our future, you know? I want to be able to give you everything you deserve." The irony was so thick Sarah almost choked on it. Alexander wanted to give her everything she deserved, all right, just not in the way she'd once hoped. That night, as they got ready for bed, Sarah watched Alexander in the bathroom mirror. He was brushing his teeth with the same methodical strokes he'd used for the 3 years they'd been married. Everything about him looked normal, familiar, safe. If she hadn't heard the conversation with Rebecca, she would never have suspected anything was wrong. "You seem different," Alexander said suddenly, catching her eye in the mirror. Sarah's heart skipped, but she kept her expression neutral. "Different how?" "I don't know. Calmer maybe? I was worried about how you'd handle losing your dad, but you seem stronger than I expected." Sarah turned to face him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, a gesture that used to feel natural and now felt like playing a role. "I think Dad's death helped me realize what's really important. I don't want to waste time worrying about things I can't control." Alexander relaxed against her touch. That's very mature of you. Your father would be proud. He had no idea how proud, Sarah thought grimly. In bed, Alexander reached for her like he always did, his hands familiar on her skin. For a moment, Sarah's resolve wavered. This was her husband. The man she'd promised to love forever. The man she'd shared her dreams with, her fears, her hopes for the future. But then she remembered his voice saying he could barely stand to touch her, and she forced herself to respond to his kisses, to move with him like nothing had changed. It was the hardest performance of her life. Afterward, as Alexander fell asleep beside her, Sarah stared at the ceiling and planned her next move. Tomorrow she would call Tom Mitchell for an update on Rebecca's investigation. She would check in with Janet Williams about the legal proceedings. She would continue to play the role of the grieving, trusting wife while secretly orchestrating the destruction of everything Alexander thought he'd built. It was exhausting living this double life. But it was also exhilarating in a way Sarah had never experienced before. For the first time in their marriage she felt like she had power. She wasn't just reacting to Alexander's choices anymore, she was making her own. Her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A text message from an unknown number. This is Tom Mitchell. Can you talk tomorrow? I have information you need to see. Sarah deleted the message and closed her eyes, a smile playing at her lips. Phase 1 of her plan was complete. Alexander still had no idea that anything had changed. He was sleeping peacefully beside her, probably dreaming about his future with Rebecca and all the money he thought he was going to steal. Let him dream, Sarah thought. In less than 2 weeks, he would wake up to a nightmare of his own making. She rolled over and watched her husband sleep, this man who had shared her bed while planning to destroy her life. Soon he would learn exactly what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted completely. And Sarah would be there to watch every moment of his world falling apart. The next morning, Sarah waited until Alexander left for work before calling Tom Mitchell. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with questions about what the private investigator might have discovered about Rebecca. Sarah, thanks for calling back. Tom's gravelly voice came through clearly. I've got good news and bad news about Rebecca Santos. Which do you want first? Give me the bad news, Sarah said, settling into her father's leather chair with a cup of coffee. The bad news is that she's even worse than we thought. The good news is that her husband has no idea, which gives us leverage. Sarah's pulse quickened. What did you find? Rebecca Santos isn't just cheating on her husband with Alexander. She's been running a side business as an escort for the past 2 years. High-end stuff. She charges $5,000 a night to wealthy men who want arm candy for business events. Sarah nearly dropped her coffee. An escort? Gets better. She's been using her job at Meridian Tech to recruit clients. Several of the company's biggest clients have paid for her services. She's essentially been prostituting herself using company connections. Does Alexander know? Hard to say for sure, but I don't think so. From what I can tell, he thinks he's her only affair. Poor bastard has no idea he's just another client, except he's getting it for free. Sarah felt a mixture of disgust and satisfaction. Rebecca had been playing Alexander just as much as Alexander had been playing her. There was a certain poetic justice in that. What about her husband? Marcus Santos, 34, works as a teacher at Lincoln High School. Clean record, no debt, volunteers at a homeless shelter on weekends. Guy's a saint, which makes this even worse. They've been married for 6 years. No kids, but not by choice. They've been trying for 3 years and doing fertility treatments. Sarah's satisfaction dimmed slightly. Marcus sounded like a genuinely good person who didn't deserve any of this. But Rebecca had made her choices, and those choices had consequences. I need copies of everything, Sarah said. Photos, financial records, client lists, all of it. Already prepared. I can have it to you this afternoon. But Sarah, be careful how you use this information. Some of Rebecca's clients are very powerful men who wouldn't appreciate being exposed. I'm not planning to expose them. I just want Rebecca and Alexander to face consequences for what they've done. Fair enough. I'll drop everything off at Janet Williams' office this afternoon. You should review it with her before deciding how to proceed. After hanging up with Tom, Sarah called Janet Williams. Perfect timing, Janet said when Sarah explained about Tom's discoveries. I've been making progress on our other fronts. Are you free this afternoon? I think it's time you met the rest of your team. My team? Sarah, you're about to execute a complex operation involving multiple companies, properties, and legal maneuvers. You need professionals who understand how to coordinate all of this without leaving you vulnerable to lawsuits or criminal charges. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself in Janet's conference room facing three people she'd never met but who apparently held the keys to her revenge. Sarah, I'd like you to meet Patricia Chin, no relation. Despite the name, she's a forensic accountant who specializes in corporate fraud investigations. Next to her is Michael Rodriguez, who handles corporate security and employee investigations for Meridian Tech. And this is Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a psychologist who consults on high-stakes divorce cases. Sarah shook hands with each of them, feeling slightly overwhelmed. This seems like a lot of people for a simple divorce. This isn't a simple divorce anymore, Janet said gently. Based on Tom's findings, we're looking at potential criminal charges against Rebecca for prostitution and fraud. Alexander could be charged as an accessory if he knew about her escort business. And there are corporate liability issues at Meridian Tech that could affect dozens of employees. I don't want to hurt innocent people, Sarah said quickly. That's exactly why we need this team, Dr. Harper said, her voice warm and reassuring. We want to make sure the consequences fall on the people who actually deserve them. But Sarah, you need to understand something. Once we start this process, there's no going back. Are you absolutely sure this is what you want? Sarah thought about Alexander's arms around her last night, his convincing performance as the loving husband. She thought about Rebecca's laugh in their bedroom. She thought about 6 months of lies while she grieved her father's illness. I'm sure. Patricia leaned forward. Then let's talk strategy. I've reviewed Tom's evidence against Rebecca, and it's damning. She's been evading taxes on her escort income, which is federal crime. She's also been using her company email to arrange meetings with clients, which puts Meridian Tech at risk for harboring prostitution. What does that mean practically? Sarah asked. Michael answered. It means Rebecca will be fired immediately when this comes to light. But more than that, she'll likely face criminal charges. Tax evasion alone could get her 5 years in federal prison. Sarah felt a chill. She'd wanted Rebecca to face consequences, but prison seemed harsh. Then she remembered Rebecca planning to help Alexander steal her inheritance, and the sympathy faded. What about Alexander? That's trickier, Janet said. We have evidence of his affair and his plans to divorce you for financial gain, but that's not criminal. However, if he knew about Rebecca's escort business and didn't report it, he could be charged as an accessory. Do we think he knew? Based on Tom's investigation, probably not, Michael said. Alexander seems to genuinely believe he's Rebecca's only affair. Which is almost funny considering how he's been deceiving you. Dr. Harper spoke up. Sarah, I want you to think carefully about what you really want to achieve here. Do you want Alexander to go to prison? Or do you just want him to understand what it feels like to be betrayed and abandoned? Was a good question. Sarah realized that she didn't actually want Alexander in prison, she just wanted him to hurt the way she was hurting. She wanted him to feel powerless and betrayed and stupid for trusting someone who was using him. I want him to lose everything he thinks he's gained from betraying me, Sarah said finally. His job, his mistress, his plans for our money. I want him to realize that he threw away a real marriage for someone who was using him just as much as he was using me. That we can definitely arrange, Janet said with satisfaction. Patricia, show her the corporate structure. Patricia spread several charts across the conference table. Your father was even more clever than we initially realized. He didn't just own 12% of Meridian Tech, he owned it through a shell company that also holds shares in 3 of Meridian's biggest competitors. As the new owner of that shell company, you have significant influence over Alexander's entire industry. Sarah stared at the charts, amazed. You mean I could get him blacklisted from other companies too? Not blacklisted exactly, but your influence could make it very difficult for him to find equivalent employment in Portland. Most of the major tech companies in the city have business relationships that you now have a stake in. Here's what I propose, Janet said. We coordinate everything to happen on the same day. Rebecca gets arrested for tax evasion and fired from Meridian Tech. Alexander gets fired for violating company policy with his affair. Rebecca's husband receives evidence of her escort business and her affair with Alexander. And you serve Alexander with divorce papers that make it clear he gets nothing. All on the same day? Sarah asked. All within the same hour if we time it right. Complete devastation with no opportunity for them to warn each other or plan a response. Sarah imagined Alexander's face when his carefully constructed world collapsed all at once. The same Alexander who'd been so confident, so sure that naive little Sarah would never figure out what was happening. When can we do it? 1 week from today, Janet said. We need time to coordinate with federal investigators on Rebecca's arrest, and Michael needs time to prepare Alexander's termination paperwork. Sarah nodded slowly. One more week of playing the loving wife. One more week of pretending everything was normal while secretly orchestrating the destruction of everything Alexander thought he'd built. There's one more thing, Dr. Harper said gently. After this happens, you're going to need support. Revenge can be satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't heal the underlying pain of betrayal. I'd like to recommend a therapist who specializes in helping people rebuild their lives after traumatic divorces. Sarah considered this. She'd been so focused on destroying Alexander and Rebecca that she hadn't thought much about what would come after. What would her life look like when this was all over? That's probably a good idea, she admitted. Good. And Sarah? Your father would be proud of you. Not just for standing up for yourself but for doing it intelligently and legally. A lot of people in your situation make emotional decisions that end up hurting them more than their cheaters. As Sarah left the law office, she felt like she was commanding an army instead of just planning a divorce. In 1 week, Alexander and Rebecca's world would explode, and they would finally understand what it felt like to be completely powerless. But first, she had to survive 6 more days of living with a man who thought he was outsmarting her while she planned his downfall. The hardest part wouldn't be executing the plan, it would be keeping the smile off her face when Alexander told her about his fake overtime tomorrow night. Sarah's phone rang at 7 in the morning, jolting her awake. Alexander was already in the shower, getting ready for another day of lies and deception. The caller ID showed Tom Mitchell's number. Sarah, we have a problem. Tom's voice was tense. I've been watching Rebecca's apartment all night. Alexander never left. Sarah sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. What do you mean? He went to her place yesterday evening around 6, just like he has every Tuesday for the past 3 months. But instead of leaving after a few hours like usual, he stayed all night. His car is still in her parking lot. Sarah's mind raced. Alexander had told her he was working late on a big client presentation. He was supposed to be at the office, not spending the night with Rebecca. Are you sure it's his car? Positive. Silver BMW license plate that matches your registration. And Sarah, there's something else. Rebecca's husband left for work an hour ago. Alexander is still inside. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Alexander wasn't just having an affair, he was getting careless about it. Staying overnight meant this relationship was escalating beyond casual cheating. They were acting like a real couple now, taking risks they wouldn't have taken before. Has this happened before? Sarah asked. Not that I've documented, but I haven't been watching him overnight until now. This could be a new development or it could be something I missed. Sarah heard the shower turn off in the master bathroom. Alexander would be out in 5 minutes, probably ready to lie to her face about where he'd spent the night. Keep watching, she told Tom. I want to know every move they make. Sarah, there's something else. I ran a deeper background check on Alexander like you asked. You're not going to like what I found. Sarah's stomach dropped. Tell me. He's done this before. Before he met you, Alexander was married to a woman named Jennifer Walsh in Seattle. Marriage lasted 2 years. She filed for divorce citing adultery, and she got almost nothing in the settlement because she couldn't prove the affair. The room started spinning. Alexander had been married before? He'd never mentioned a previous marriage, not once in 3 years together. Are you sure? I have the divorce records right here. Alexander Richard Webb, married to Jennifer Marie Walsh from 2019 to 2021. She alleged in the filing that he was having an affair with a co-worker, but she couldn't gather enough evidence to prove it in court. What happened to Jennifer? She moved back to her hometown in Montana after the divorce. From what I can find, she's working as a teacher now and seems to be doing okay. But Sarah, the pattern is identical. He married her, had an affair with someone from work, then tried to manipulate the divorce proceedings to his advantage. Sarah sank back against her pillows, feeling sick. She wasn't Alexander's first victim, she was just his latest. Everything about their relationship, everything she'd thought was special and unique, was actually just Alexander following the same playbook he'd used before. Does he know you found this information? No way. I've been very careful to keep my investigation invisible. But Sarah, this changes things. Alexander isn't just a cheating husband, he's a predator who targets women for their assets and then discards them when he's done. The bathroom door opened and Alexander emerged in a towel, hair still damp from the shower. He looked relaxed and satisfied, the look of a man who'd had a very good night. I have to go, Sarah whispered into the phone. Send me everything you found about Jennifer. She hung up just as Alexander walked into the bedroom, whistling softly under his breath. Morning, beautiful, he said, bending down to kiss her forehead. Sorry I got in so late last night. That client presentation ran way longer than expected. Sarah looked up at him, this man she'd shared a bed with for 3 years, and saw a complete stranger. A liar. A predator. A man who'd done this exact same thing to another woman just a few years ago. How late? She asked, keeping her voice sleepy and unconcerned. Oh, around midnight, maybe? You were already asleep. Alexander moved to his dresser and started pulling out clothes. The client loved our proposal though. I think we're going to land this deal. Midnight. Alexander had just lied to her face without even blinking. According to Tom, his car had been at Rebecca's apartment all night. That's great, honey. I'm proud of you for working so hard. Alexander paused in buttoning his shirt and looked at her with surprise. Really? I was worried you might be getting frustrated with all my late nights. Why would I be frustrated? I know you're doing it for us. For our future. Sarah forced a loving smile. I trust you completely. The words tasted like poison in her mouth, but Alexander's face lit up with relief and what looked like genuine affection. For a moment, Sarah almost felt sorry for him. He had no idea that his wife had become a better actor than he was. You're amazing, you know that? Alexander sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. I don't know what I did to deserve you. The irony was so thick Sarah almost laughed. Instead, she squeezed his hand and gazed at him with adoring eyes. You don't have to deserve love, Alex. It's just something I give you because you're mine. Alexander's expression grew tender, and for a moment he looked like the man she'd fallen in love with. I love you so much, Sarah. More than you'll ever know. The scary thing was, Sarah almost believed he meant it. Alexander was such a good liar that he'd probably convinced himself his feelings were real, even while he planned to divorce her and steal her inheritance. After Alexander left for work, Sarah called Janet Williams immediately. Janet, we need to move up our timeline. Alexander spent the night with Rebecca, and I just found out he was married before. He's done this exact same thing to another woman. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Married before? That wasn't in any of the background checks we ran. Tom Mitchell found the records. Alexander was married to Jennifer Walsh in Seattle from 2019 to 2021. She divorced him for adultery but couldn't prove it, so she got almost nothing in the settlement. My God. Sarah, this means Alexander isn't just cheating, he's running a con. He targets women, marries them, builds their trust, then destroys them financially when he's ready to move on. Sarah felt cold all over. Which means Rebecca probably isn't his exit strategy. She's just his next mark. Exactly. Once Alexander divorces you and gets what he thinks is half your inheritance, he'll probably marry Rebecca and start the whole cycle over again. Unless Rebecca ends up in prison for tax evasion first. True. But Sarah, this new information changes our strategy. We're not just dealing with a cheating husband anymore, we're dealing with someone who's made a career out of financial fraud through marriage. Sarah thought about Jennifer Walsh, alone in Montana, probably still recovering from the emotional and financial devastation Alexander had left in his wake. How many other women had there been? How many lives had Alexander destroyed while perfecting his technique? I want to contact Jennifer, Sarah said suddenly. That's actually not a bad idea. If Alexander has a pattern of this behavior, Jennifer's testimony could be valuable in your divorce proceedings. And she might have insights into how Alexander operates that could help us. Can you find her contact information? I'll have Tom track her down. But Sarah, are you sure you want to talk to her? It might be painful to hear about Alexander's previous marriage. Sarah thought about this. It would definitely be painful to learn more details about Alexander's capacity for deception. But it might also be empowering to connect with someone who'd survived what she was going through. I need to know what I'm really dealing with, Sarah said. If Alexander has done this before, I want to understand his playbook so I can make sure he never does it again. All right. I'll set it up. In the meantime, we're moving forward with the original plan, but we're accelerating the timeline. Instead of waiting a week, we're going to execute everything this Friday. This Friday? That's only 3 days away. I know it's fast, but Alexander is escalating his behavior. Spending the night with Rebecca means he's getting sloppy, which could work in our favor, but it also means he might be planning to make his move sooner than we expected. Sarah felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with terror. In 3 days, Alexander's world would explode. In 3 days, he would finally understand what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted completely. Janet? When this is all over, I want to help Jennifer Walsh. And any other women Alexander might have hurt. I want to make sure he never gets the chance to do this to anyone else. That's very generous of you, Sarah. And with your father's resources, You'll be in a position to make a real difference. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her father's study and thought about Jennifer Walsh. Somewhere in Montana, there was a woman who'd been through exactly what Sarah was experiencing now. A woman who'd loved Alexander, trusted him, built a life with him, only to discover it was all a lie. But unlike Jennifer, Sarah had resources. She had her father's wealth, his strategic mind, and his protective instincts working for her even after his death. She had a team of professionals helping her fight back. Alexander had picked the wrong woman this time. Instead of another victim, he'd found his match. And in 3 days he was going to find out just how badly he'd miscalculated. Jennifer Walsh had a warm voice with a slight Montana accent that made Sarah feel instantly comfortable. When Janet's office arranged the phone call, Sarah had been nervous about talking to Alexander's ex-wife. But Jennifer sounded genuinely pleased to hear from her. "I wondered if this day would come," Jennifer said after Sarah explained who she was. "When I heard Alexander had gotten married again, I hoped maybe he'd changed. But I had a feeling he hadn't." "He never mentioned being married before," Sarah said, still struggling to process this information. "I'm not surprised. Alexander is very good at rewriting his own history to fit whatever story he needs to tell." Jennifer's voice grew sad. "When we met, he told me his last girlfriend had cheated on him and broken his heart. Made me feel so special that he was willing to trust me with his love again." Sarah's heart clenched. Alexander had told her almost the exact same story. "How did you find out about the affair?" "I caught him texting another woman at 2 in the morning. When I confronted him, he swore it was just a friend from work going through a rough time. I believed him because I wanted to believe him." Jennifer paused. "But something in my gut told me to pay attention after that. I started noticing things: late nights, new clothes I hadn't seen him buy, credit card charges at places we'd never been together." "How long did it take you to get proof?" 6 months. 6 months of feeling crazy, of second-guessing myself, of letting him convince me I was being paranoid and jealous. When I finally hired a private investigator, I found out the affair had been going on for over a year." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking about her own 6 months of confusion and self-doubt. What was the worst part? "The lies," Jennifer said without hesitation. "Not just about the affair but about everything. I found out later that Alexander had been planning to divorce me almost from the beginning of our marriage. He'd been slowly moving money around, talking to lawyers, building a case for why he deserved half of everything I'd worked for." "Everything you'd worked for?" "I owned a small marketing business when we met. It wasn't worth millions, but it was successful and growing. Alexander convinced me to make him a partner after we got married. Said it would be good for tax purposes." Jennifer's laugh was bitter. "What it really did was give him a legal claim to half my business when he divorced me." Sarah felt sick. "Did he get it?" "He got 40% of the business value plus half our other assets. I had to sell my company to pay him off. It destroyed everything I'd built over 10 years of hard work." "Jennifer, I'm so sorry." "Thank you. But Sarah, why are you calling me? Are you going through the same thing?" Sarah took a deep breath and told Jennifer everything about finding Alexander with Rebecca, about her father's inheritance that Alexander didn't know about the revenge plan she was orchestrating. When she finished, Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah," she finally said, "you have a chance to do something I never could. You have the resources and the evidence to make sure Alexander faces real consequences for what he's done. Not just to you but to me and probably to other women we don't even know about." "Other women?" "I did some digging after our divorce. Alexander has a pattern that goes back at least 10 years. He targets successful women, marries them, gains access to their assets, then destroys them emotionally and financially before moving on to the next victim." Sarah felt cold all over. "How many women?" "I found evidence of at least 3 others before me. Maybe more. Alexander is a professional, Sarah. This is what he does for a living." The room seemed to spin around Sarah. She'd thought Alexander was just a cheating husband, but he was actually a serial predator who'd built his entire life around destroying women. "Jennifer, would you be willing to testify about Alexander's pattern of behavior? My lawyer thinks it could help ensure he faces serious legal consequences." "Absolutely. I've been waiting 3 years for the chance to make Alexander pay for what he did to me. If helping you means other women won't go through what we've been through, I'll do whatever it takes." After the call with Jennifer, Sarah felt a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her marriage anymore, it was about stopping a predator who'd been victimizing women for years. She called Janet immediately. "Jennifer confirmed everything we suspected," Sarah said. "Alexander is a serial marriage fraudster. She thinks there are at least 3 other victims before her. That changes everything, Janet said grimly. We're not just planning a divorce anymore, we're building a criminal case. I'm going to contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. If Alexander has been doing this across state lines, it becomes federal jurisdiction. What does that mean for our timeline? It means we need to be even more careful, but it also means Alexander could face serious prison time. Marriage fraud, interstate financial schemes, we're talking about federal felonies that carry 10 to 20-year sentences. Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and fear. She'd wanted Alexander to face consequences, but federal prison seemed almost too severe. Then she thought about Jennifer losing her business, about the other unknown women Alexander had destroyed, and the sympathy evaporated. How do we proceed? We stick to the Friday timeline, but now we're coordinating with federal investigators instead of just local law enforcement. The FBI wants to arrest Alexander at the same time Rebecca gets arrested for tax evasion. They think the 2 cases might be connected. Connected how? They're investigating whether Alexander knew about Rebecca's escort business and was taking a cut of her profits. If so, he could be charged with operating a prostitution ring in addition to marriage fraud. Sarah almost laughed at the irony. Alexander thought he was so smart, playing multiple women at once. Instead, he'd gotten involved with someone whose criminal activities could bring down his entire operation. What do I need to do? Keep acting normal for 2 more days. Don't give Alexander any reason to suspect that anything has changed. The FBI is going to be monitoring both Alexander and Rebecca starting tomorrow, so any unusual behavior from you could tip them off. That evening, Sarah cooked Alexander's favorite meal and opened a bottle of expensive wine. She needed him relaxed and unsuspecting for the next 48 hours. This is nice, Alexander said, raising his wine glass in a toast. What's the occasion? Do I need an occasion to celebrate my husband? Sarah clinked her glass against his, maintaining eye contact like a loving wife should. I guess not. You've just seemed, I don't know, different lately. More confident, maybe? It's attractive. If only he knew where that confidence was coming from, Sarah thought. I think losing Dad made me realize how short life is. I don't want to waste time on things that don't matter. I want to focus on what's really important. Like what? Like us. Like our future together. Like making sure the people we love get what they deserve. Alexander's expression grew tender, and he reached across the table to take her hand. I love you so much, Sarah. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Sarah squeezed his hand and smiled warmly, even as her stomach turned at his touch. You're the best thing that ever happened to me too, Alex. I can't imagine my life without you. It wasn't entirely a lie. Sarah couldn't imagine her life without Alexander, but only because she was about to make sure he was permanently removed from it. You know what? Alexander said suddenly. Let's go away this weekend. Just the 2 of us. We could drive up to that bed and breakfast in wine country you're always talking about. Sarah's heart skipped. Alexander was supposed to be arrested on Friday morning. There wouldn't be any romantic weekend getaway. That sounds wonderful, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through her system. But don't you have that big client presentation on Friday? I can move it. You're more important than any client. The lies came so easily to him, Sarah marveled. Alexander probably had plans with Rebecca this weekend and was using the fake getaway story to explain his absence to both women. Let's see how the week goes, Sarah said diplomatically. I'd hate for you to miss an important meeting because of me. You're worth missing any meeting for, Alexander said, bringing her hand to his lips for a soft kiss. Sarah smiled and let herself look touched by the romantic gesture, even as she counted down the hours until Alexander's arrest. 46 hours and counting. Soon, Alexander would learn that Sarah was worth a lot more than he'd ever imagined, just not in the way he'd expected. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Sarah's mood as she prepared for what might be her last normal day with Alexander. In less than 24 hours, everything would change forever. Alexander was unusually attentive at breakfast, complimenting her cooking and talking about their future plans in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. He was either feeling guilty about his double life, or he was laying groundwork for some new deception. I've been thinking, he said as he buttered his toast. Maybe we should start trying for a baby soon. Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. A baby? I know we said we'd wait until we were more financially stable, but I'm feeling optimistic about work. And you're not getting any younger. Alexander's tone was casual, but Sarah caught the calculated look in his eyes. Baby. Alexander wanted her to have a baby while he was planning to divorce her and steal her inheritance. The manipulation was so breathtaking that Sarah had to grip her coffee mug to keep her hands from shaking with rage. That's a big decision, she managed to say. Maybe we should talk about it more when things settle down after Dad's estate is finished. Of course. No pressure. I just think you'd be an amazing mother. Sarah excused herself to the bathroom and called Janet Williams immediately. He wants me to get pregnant, she whispered into the phone. Alexander just brought up having a baby. Son of a bitch, Janet's professional composure cracked for a moment. He's trying to make you more financially vulnerable. Pregnant women have a harder time leaving bad marriages, and child support would give him ongoing access to your assets. Is that what he did to Jennifer? I'll have Tom ask her, but I wouldn't be surprised. Sarah, this confirms that Alexander is escalating his timeline. We need to move fast. Is everything still on track for tomorrow? Better than on track. The FBI finished their investigation of Rebecca's escort business yesterday. They found evidence that she's been laundering money through multiple accounts and evading taxes on over $200,000 in income. They also found communications suggesting Alexander has been helping her recruit clients from Meridian Tech. So he did know about the escort business? Not only did he know, he was facilitating it. Alexander has been getting kickbacks from Rebecca for introducing her to wealthy clients. He's essentially been pimping her out while pretending to be in love with her. Sarah sat down hard on the toilet seat, stunned. The situation was even worse than she'd imagined. Alexander wasn't just cheating on her, he was running a criminal enterprise with his mistress. What does this mean for tomorrow? It means Alexander is looking at federal charges for prostitution, money laundering, tax evasion, and marriage fraud. He could get 25 years in prison. 25 years. Sarah tried to imagine Alexander, who was so vain about his appearance and status, spending the next quarter-century in federal prison. The thought should have given her satisfaction, but instead she felt hollow. Janet, am I doing the right thing? 25 years seems like. Sarah, stop right there. Alexander chose to commit these crimes. You didn't make him cheat on you, pimp out his girlfriend, or plan to steal your inheritance. All you're doing is making sure he faces consequences for choices he made. Sarah knew Janet was right, but the enormity of what was about to happen was starting to hit her. In less than 24 hours, the man she'd shared a bed with for 3 years would be in federal custody. What about Rebecca? She's looking at 15 to 20 years. The FBI raid on her apartment is scheduled for 6 a.m. tomorrow. Alexander's arrest will happen at his office at 9 a.m., right before the quarterly board meeting at Meridian Tech. Why during the board meeting? Because you're going to be there. Sarah's heart stopped. What? Sarah, you own 12% of Meridian Tech through your father's trust. As a major shareholder, you have the right to attend board meetings. Tomorrow morning, you're going to walk into that conference room and watch Alexander get arrested in front of his colleagues. The idea was both terrifying and thrilling. Sarah had spent 3 years feeling powerless in her marriage, and now she would have a front-row seat to Alexander's downfall. What do I need to do? Just show up. I'll be there as your legal representative. Michael Rodriguez will handle the corporate side of things. All you have to do is sit there and watch justice being served. After she hung up with Janet, Sarah looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at her looked calm and composed, but her eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there a week ago. She was changing, becoming someone stronger and more decisive. Someone who fought back instead of just enduring. She liked this new version of herself. When Sarah returned to the kitchen, Alexander was loading dishes into the dishwasher, a domestic scene that would have warmed her heart just days ago but now seemed like another performance. Everything okay? He asked. You were in there for a while. Just talking to Lisa. She's worried about how I'm handling Dad's death. That's sweet of her. Maybe we should have her and Tom over for dinner this weekend. Another lie. Alexander had no intention of being available for dinner this weekend, because he expected to be celebrating his successful manipulation of Sarah somewhere with Rebecca. That sounds nice, Sarah said. I'll call her later and set something up. The rest of the day passed in a strange, dreamlike state. Sarah went through the motions of normal life: grocery shopping, laundry, returning phone calls, while internally counting down the hours until Alexander's world exploded. That evening, Alexander came home with flowers and takeout from Sarah's favorite Thai restaurant. What's all this for? Sarah asked, accepting the bouquet with a smile she didn't feel. Do I need a reason to spoil my beautiful wife? Alexander kissed her cheek and began unpacking the food containers. I've just been thinking about how lucky I am to have you. Sarah set the flowers in a vase, wondering if this was Alexander's way of assuaging his guilt, or if he was building up to asking her for something. With Alexander, every gesture had an ulterior motive. "You've been so thoughtful lately," she said, settling at the kitchen table. "First the romantic dinner idea, now flowers and dinner. I'm starting to think you're up to something." Alexander laughed, but Sarah caught a flicker of nervousness in his expression. "Can't a man just appreciate his wife without having an agenda?" "Of course. It's just nice to feel appreciated." They ate dinner while Alexander told her amusing stories about his co-workers, his voice animated and engaging. He was working hard to be charming tonight, and Sarah found herself wondering if this was how he'd been with Jennifer Walsh in the final days of their marriage, extra attentive and loving while planning her destruction. "Sarah," Alexander said as they cleared the dishes, "I know I've been working a lot of late nights lately, and I appreciate how understanding you've been. Some wives would have given their husbands grief about it." "I trust you," Sarah said simply. "I know you're working hard for our future." Alexander's face lit up with what looked like genuine relief. "That means everything to me. And I promise after this project wraps up, things will slow down. We'll have more time together. I'm looking forward to it." As they got ready for bed, Sarah watched Alexander brush his teeth in the bathroom mirror. In 12 hours he would be in handcuffs. In 12 hours his carefully constructed double life would collapse completely. And he had absolutely no idea. "You know what?" Alexander said suddenly, catching her eye in the mirror. "I'm going to call in sick tomorrow. Let's spend the day together, just the two of us." Sarah's heart stopped. Alexander couldn't call in sick, he needed to be at the office for his arrest. If he stayed home it would complicate everything. "Don't you have that important board meeting tomorrow?" she asked carefully. "The board meeting can survive without me for one day. You're more important." Sarah's mind raced. She needed Alexander at that office tomorrow morning, but she couldn't seem too eager about it without raising suspicion. "Alex, you've been working so hard on this project. Are you sure you want to risk missing something important?" "Nothing's more important than you." Alexander moved behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "I've been neglecting you and I want to make up for it." The irony was suffocating. Alexander had been neglecting her to spend time with his prostitute girlfriend, and now he wanted to skip work on the one day when his presence was absolutely crucial for his arrest. "That's sweet, but I actually have some errands to run tomorrow anyway," Sarah said, leaning back against his chest like a loving wife should. "Why don't you go to your meeting and we can spend the evening together instead?" "What kind of errands?" "Just some things related to Dad's estate. Nothing exciting." Sarah turned in his arms and smiled up at him. "But I'd love to have dinner with you tomorrow night. Maybe we could try that new steakhouse downtown?" Alexander's expression grew tender. "You're amazing, you know that? Most women would be upset about their husband working so much, but you're worried about me missing important meetings. I want you to be successful. Your success is my success. I love you so much, Sarah." "I love you too." Sarah let Alexander make love to her that night, closing her eyes and thinking about Jennifer Walsh, about the other unnamed women Alexander had destroyed, about the justice that was finally coming. In the morning, Alexander would wake up for the last time in their bed as a free man. As Alexander slept beside her, Sarah stared at the ceiling and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she needed to do. Tomorrow, Alexander would learn that Sarah wasn't the naive, trusting wife he thought he'd married. Tomorrow he would discover that he'd chosen the wrong woman to victimize. Tomorrow everything would change. Sarah woke before her alarm, her heart already racing with anticipation. Beside her, Alexander slept peacefully, completely unaware that this was his last morning as a free man. She watched him for a moment, studying the face that had lied to her so convincingly for months. In a few hours that handsome face would be in handcuffs. She slipped out of bed quietly and made coffee, trying to keep her hands steady as she went through her normal morning routine. Today needed to look exactly like every other day, right up until the moment Alexander's world exploded. At 7:30, Alexander wandered into the kitchen in his pajamas, hair messy from sleep. "Morning, beautiful. You're up early." "Couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those errands I need to run today." Sarah handed him a cup of coffee, proud of how normal her voice sounded. "Want some company? I could still call in sick and come with you." Sarah's heart skipped, but she forced a smile. "That's sweet, but they're really boring legal things. Plus, you've been working so hard on this project, I'd feel terrible if you missed something important because of me." Alexander studied her face for a moment, and Sarah held her breath, wondering if he could sense that something had changed. But then he smiled and kissed her forehead. You're probably right. And honestly, I should probably show my face at the board meeting this morning. Make sure the bosses know I'm committed to the company. That's my ambitious husband, Sarah said, feeling a surge of dark satisfaction. I'm proud of you. As Alexander showered and got dressed for work, Sarah called Janet Williams. Everything's on schedule, Janet said. Rebecca was arrested at her apartment 20 minutes ago. The FBI is in position outside Meridian Tech. Are you ready for this? I'm ready. Sarah surprised herself with how calm she sounded. Remember, you don't have to say anything to Alexander when they arrest him. In fact, it's better if you don't. Let the FBI handle everything and we'll deal with the legal aftermath later. What about his things? His clothes, his personal items? We'll arrange for him to collect his belongings after he makes bail. Assuming he can make bail, the charges are serious enough that the judge might deny it. After hanging up, Sarah helped Alexander choose his tie like she had hundreds of times before. He was nervous about the board meeting, adjusting his collar and checking his appearance in the mirror repeatedly. Do I look professional enough? He asked, smoothing his hair. You look perfect, Sarah said, straightening his tie with steady hands. Confident and successful. Thanks, baby. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'll never have to find out, Sarah said, and for the first time in days she was telling the complete truth. At 8:15, Alexander grabbed his briefcase and keys. I'll probably be home around 6, he said, kissing Sarah goodbye at the front door. Maybe we can start planning that weekend getaway. I'd like that, Sarah replied, knowing there would be no weekend getaway, no romantic dinner tonight, no future at all for Alexander outside of a federal prison cell. She watched his BMW pull out of the driveway and felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The man driving away was someone she'd loved deeply, but he was also someone who'd never really existed. The real Alexander was a predator, a criminal, a man who destroyed women for profit. At 8:45, Sarah arrived at the Meridian Tech building. Janet Williams was waiting in the lobby, looking professional in a navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase. How are you feeling? Janet asked as they rode the elevator to the 20th floor. Like I'm about to watch justice being served, Sarah said. The boardroom was already full when they arrived. Sarah recognized several faces from company events she'd attended with Alexander over the years. They all looked surprised to see her, whispering among themselves about why Alexander's wife was at a board meeting. Michael Rodriguez, the head of corporate security, nodded at Sarah from across the room. Everything was in place. At exactly 9 o'clock, Alexander walked into the boardroom with his usual confident stride. He was talking to a colleague and laughing about something when he saw Sarah sitting at the conference table. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and finally, a flicker of fear. Sarah? What are you doing here? Before she could answer, the boardroom doors opened again. 3 FBI agents in dark suits entered the room, their presence immediately commanding everyone's attention. Alexander Webb? The lead agent, a stern-looking woman with gray hair, held up her badge. Yes. Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. FBI. You're under arrest for marriage fraud, money laundering, facilitating prostitution, and tax evasion. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Alexander's face went white as the agent began reading him his rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Sarah watched as handcuffs were placed around Alexander's wrists, the same hands that had touched her so tenderly just hours ago. He kept looking at her with desperate, pleading eyes, as if she could somehow explain what was happening. Sarah, he called out as the agents began to escort him from the room. Sarah, I don't understand. What's going on? Sarah stood up slowly, every eye in the room focused on her. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. What's going on, Alexander, is that you chose the wrong woman to victimize. Alexander's mouth fell open. Victimize? Sarah, what are you talking about? I love you. No, Sarah said, walking closer to him. You love my inheritance. You love the money you thought you'd get when you divorced me. You love the idea of using me the same way you used Jennifer Walsh and God knows how many other women. Alexander's face crumbled as he realized she knew everything. Sarah, please let me explain. There's nothing to explain. I heard you, Alexander. I heard you planning my divorce with Rebecca. I heard you talking about barely being able to stand touching me. I heard everything. The FBI agents were getting impatient, but they allowed Sarah this moment. Everyone in the room was transfixed by the drama unfolding before them. The affair with Rebecca, the marriage fraud, the prostitution ring, it's all over, Alexander. Your pattern of destroying women ends today. You don't understand, Alexander said desperately. Rebecca doesn't mean anything to me. It's you I love. It's always been you. Sarah almost laughed. Even now, even in handcuffs, Alexander was still lying. Still trying to manipulate her emotions. I understand perfectly. You're a predator who targets successful women, marries them, gains access to their assets, then destroys them when you're ready to move on to the next victim. The only thing you didn't understand is that this time, you picked someone whose father was smarter than you are. Your father's inheritance, Alexander breathed, finally understanding. The assets you said weren't worth much. $15 million, Sarah said clearly, making sure everyone in the room could hear. $15 million that you'll never see a penny of, because my father protected me from men like you. Alexander sagged against the FBI agents holding him, the fight going out of him completely. He finally understood that he'd lost everything: his freedom, his schemes, his future, his carefully constructed double life. Sarah, please, he whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry too, Alexander. I'm sorry for Jennifer Walsh. I'm sorry for all the other women you've hurt. And I'm sorry that it took my father's death for me to finally see who you really are. The FBI agents led Alexander from the room, and Sarah heard him calling her name until the elevator doors closed. She stood there for a moment, surrounded by shocked faces and whispered conversations, feeling like she was waking up from a 3-year nightmare. Ma'am? Michael Rodriguez approached her carefully. Are you all right? Sarah looked around the boardroom at the executives who were staring at her with new respect, at Janet Williams who was smiling proudly, at the empty chair where Alexander had planned to sit through another boring meeting while secretly plotting her destruction. I'm perfect, Sarah said, and for the first time in months she really meant it. Outside the Meridian Tech building, Sarah saw Rebecca being loaded into a separate FBI van. Their eyes met for a moment through the vehicle's window. Rebecca looked scared and young and nothing like the confident woman who'd been laughing in Sarah's bedroom just days ago. Sarah felt no sympathy for her. Rebecca had made her choices just like Alexander had made his. Now they would both face the consequences together. As Sarah walked to her car, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it to find a message from Jennifer Walsh. Saw the news about Alexander's arrest. Thank you for making sure he can never hurt anyone else. You're a hero. Sarah smiled as she got into her car. She didn't feel like a hero, she felt like a woman who'd finally learned to fight back. And it felt amazing. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the living room of her new house, a beautiful craftsman-style home in the hills overlooking Portland. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the fresh flowers she'd arranged on the coffee table. Everything about this space was hers, chosen by her, paid for by her. For the first time in years she felt completely at home. The doorbell rang and Sarah opened it to find Tom Mitchell holding a thick manila envelope. The final divorce papers came through yesterday, he said, handing her the envelope. It's official. You're free. Sarah took the papers with steady hands. Her marriage to Alexander was officially over, dissolved by a judge who'd been shocked by the evidence of his crimes. Alexander had tried to contest the divorce from his federal prison cell, but with his criminal convictions and the mountain of evidence against him, he'd had no legal ground to stand on. Thank you, Tom. For everything. My pleasure. How are you doing with all this? Sarah considered the question. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and emotional upheaval. Alexander had been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple felonies. Rebecca had received 12 years and was already serving her time in a federal facility in California. The trial had been difficult, especially when Sarah had to testify about the intimate details of her marriage's breakdown. But it had also been cathartic. Standing in that courtroom, telling her story in her own words, watching Alexander face the consequences of his actions, it had felt like reclaiming her power. I'm good, Sarah said and realized she meant it. Really good. After Tom left, Sarah settled at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened her laptop. She had work to do, important work that gave her more satisfaction than anything she'd done in years. 3 months ago, Sarah had established the Jennifer Walsh Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping women escape financially abusive marriages. Using a significant portion of her inheritance, she created a network of lawyers, counselors, and safe houses specifically designed to help women who were being victimized by predators like Alexander. Jennifer Walsh herself had become the foundation's first success story. Sarah had helped her start a new marketing business in Montana, providing both startup capital and ongoing support. Jennifer was thriving now, her business growing rapidly and her confidence fully restored. But Jennifer wasn't the only woman Alexander had hurt. During the investigation, 2 more of his victims had come forward, women he'd targeted and discarded in the years before he met Jennifer. Sarah had helped them both. One with legal fees to reclaim assets Alexander had stolen, the other with therapy and career counseling to rebuild her life. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her work on the Foundation's quarterly report. "Sarah, it's Janet. I have news you're going to want to hear." "Good news or bad news?" "Excellent news. Remember how we discussed pursuing civil charges against Alexander to recover damages for his victims?" "Of course. The judge just awarded a settlement of $2 million to be split between you, Jennifer, and the other victims. Alexander's assets, including his share of the house you used to live in, have been liquidated to pay the judgment." Sarah smiled. Alexander had thought he was so clever, planning to steal her inheritance. Instead, he'd lost everything he'd ever owned, and that money would now go to help the women he tried to destroy. "There's more," Janet continued. "Alexander's case has attracted attention from federal prosecutors in 3 other states. They think he may have victims we haven't identified yet, and they're opening investigations." "Good. Every woman he hurt deserves justice." After hanging up with Janet, Sarah returned to her laptop, but she was interrupted again by another call. This one made her smile. "Hi, James." "Hi, beautiful. How's your morning going?" James Patterson was Janet Williams' law partner, and he'd been part of Sarah's legal team throughout the divorce proceedings. Somewhere between depositions and court hearings, their professional relationship had become something more personal. James was everything Alexander had pretended to be: honest, kind, genuinely supportive, and completely transparent about his feelings and intentions. Productive. "I just got the final divorce papers, and Janet called with news about the civil settlement." "That's fantastic. Are you free for lunch? I have something I want to discuss with you." "Something good?" "Something very good. Meet me at that little cafe downtown in an hour?" An hour later, Sarah walked into the cozy cafe where she and James had shared their first unofficial date 3 months ago. He was already there, sitting at their usual table by the window, looking handsome in his navy suit and looking slightly nervous. "You look like you have news," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from him. "I do. The Oregon State Bar Association wants to give you their Public Service Award for your work with the Foundation." Sarah's mouth fell open. "Seriously? Seriously? You've helped more women escape abusive marriages in 6 months than most organizations help in years. You're making a real difference, Sarah. We're making a difference. I couldn't do any of this without your legal expertise." James reached across the table and took her hand. "Sarah, there's something else I want to talk to you about." "Okay. I know it's only been 6 months since your divorce was finalized. I know you're still healing from everything Alexander put you through. But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just professional admiration." Sarah's heart started beating faster. She'd been developing feelings for James too, but she'd been scared to act on them. After Alexander's betrayal, trusting another man felt terrifying. "James? I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow," he said quickly. "I'm not asking you to move in with me or make any big commitments. I'm just asking if you'd consider going on a real date with me. Not a working lunch or a Foundation meeting, but an actual date where we talk about things that have nothing to do with law or divorce or your ex-husband." Sarah looked at James's earnest face, at his kind eyes and genuine smile, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope for a romantic future. "I'd like that," she said softly. James's face lit up. "Really? Really? But James, I need you to know that I'm not the same woman I was when I was married to Alexander. I'm stronger now, but I'm also more cautious. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust someone completely again. Sarah, you survived a 3-year marriage to a professional con artist and came out the other side stronger and more successful than ever. You turned your pain into purpose and used your resources to help other women. If anything, what you've been through has made you more amazing, not less." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for saying that. I mean every word. And Sarah, I'm not asking you to trust me completely right away. Trust is earned, and I'm willing to earn yours however long it takes." That evening, Sarah stood on the deck of her new house, looking out over the city lights below. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Saw the news about your award. So proud of you. Dad would be too." Sarah smiled, thinking about her father. He'd been gone for 7 months now, but she felt his presence more strongly than ever. His protection, his strategic thinking, his love, they'd all played a part in her survival and recovery. Another text came through, this one from Jennifer Walsh. Just helped another woman leave her abusive husband using resources from your foundation. You're changing lives, Sarah. Thank you for turning your pain into purpose. Sarah looked at the messages and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Alexander had tried to destroy her, but instead he'd unwittingly created someone stronger. His betrayal had revealed her own power and given her the motivation to help other women find theirs. Her final text of the evening came from James. Thank you for saying yes to dinner tomorrow. I can't wait to learn about all the parts of you that have nothing to do with being strong or successful or impressive. I want to know about your favorite movies and whether you like to dance and what makes you laugh until your stomach hurts. Sarah typed back, I can't wait to find out who I am when I'm not fighting for my life. See you tomorrow. As she got ready for bed in her beautiful new house, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been living a lie, married to a man who was planning her destruction. Tonight, she was free, financially secure, making a difference in the world, and cautiously optimistic about love again. Alexander was in federal prison, his career destroyed, his schemes exposed, his pattern of victimizing women permanently ended. Rebecca was serving her own sentence, her marriage destroyed, her escort business shut down. Both of them had lost everything they'd thought they'd gained by betraying Sarah. But Sarah had gained everything: her freedom, her power, her purpose, and possibly even her chance at real love. She looked at her father's photo on the nightstand and whispered, Thank you, Daddy, for protecting me even when I didn't know I needed protection. For teaching me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. Outside her window, Portland sparkled in the darkness, full of possibilities and new beginnings. Sarah had survived the worst betrayal of her life and emerged victorious. She'd turned her pain into power and her anger into action. Most importantly, she'd learned that she didn't need anyone else to save her. She was perfectly capable of saving herself. And that knowledge would stay with her forever, ensuring that no one would ever again mistake her kindness for weakness or her trust for naivety. Sarah had found her strength and she was never giving it up again.